What is going on? I want to welcome you from half court for today, Wednesday, May 29th, 2024. I am one of your hosts, Sean Murphy, alongside the man, the myth, the Sergey, Troy Sergey. Troy, it's good to see you, my friend. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Sean. Awesome little run from our Eastern Conference division rivals, the Indiana Pacers. Of course, living here, I've kind of adopted them as a
Your
second
new
favorite team.
hometown's team.
Yeah, my hometown second favorite NBA team had a great little run. Sad to see the season end, but my goodness, to beat the Bucks in the first round and to go down 3-2 against the Knicks and then win an awesome Game 6 and Game 7. Pretty cool run. Had made Boston, really grind towards the end and made things very competitive with them. Was great to see. But yeah, we got a Celtics coming out of the East and more than likely a Dallas Mavericks team coming out of the West. So
Yeah, and I think unlike when the Hawks made the Eastern Conference Finals a few years ago, there's actually a lot of reason to believe that there's sustainable success
Pacers,
that can be
yeah,
had in Indiana.
right,
And if you're excited about anything, for if you take any silver lining from that series, other than the fact that you could have won each and every game that you were in, it's also the fact that you have guys like Andrew Nemhard that looked like a guy the last two games in particular, especially when given that opportunity. And Rick Carlisle is just great at building a culture, great at coaching and developing teams. So I think he'll be able to help them with help those guys with taking the next steps. And if you're the general manager of the Pacers, you feel pretty good with, pushing your chips in the middle of the table a little bit and starting to propel what you have going on because, it's a pretty good situation in Indiana presently.
yeah, it
So,
really is. And bringing in Pascal Siakam, I think, was huge, huge, huge. A couple weeks before the deadline in
yep.
mid-January. So I'm curious to see what this offseason is going to look like. Are they still? Do they still think one more little tweak can make them even more competitive than they already are? I don't know. But also, there's that reason to not change anything and run this entire roster back. So it's
Do
going
you
to be really
think it sounds like the Pacers are reportedly, I believe it was for Shams Charania, that they're reportedly planning on offering Pascal Siakam a max contract this
yeah.
offseason. Do you think he's earned that deal? Do you think, as someone who supports the Pacers, do you feel comfortable with Pascal Siakam being a max player? I mean, I think personally, if you're looking at what you want to see from a guy that you trade for to be your number two player, I think he about checked every box. That doesn't mean I might be in love with paying him max dollars. But having said that, I think he's pretty good to have around Tyrese Halliburton. Especially
Right.
when you're Indiana, you're not going to have many opportunities to get Pascal Siakam. So
Right.
if you're going
Right.
to overpay for a guy, I think he makes sense.
Right. Knowing that you probably are overpaying going into that and looking yourself in the mirror and saying you're okay with that, I think is something that has to be done. But yeah, like you said, I think that is a good move because, finding a Batman is very hard in this league. But once you find a Batman, it's even harder, I think, sometimes to find a Robin. And I
Yep.
think Siakam fits that mold with him and Tyrese. That would be very hard to replace. So yeah, I'm all for it, but then you have to look in the mirror and really, really push hard to try to get maybe some veterans who would come to Indiana for even a little bit less than they could get elsewhere. But also with a guy like Tyrese Halliburton, that's a very attractive thing for all positions, right? I mean, a wing would love to have a Tyrese Halliburton as a point guard. If you want to get go a little bit big and kind of having a backup with Miles Turner, a vet, who's a proven, down low defender and, can even block shots and, grab rebounds, then yeah, I think even him would love to have a Tyrese Halliburton to play pick and roll with, right? So yeah, I think you have to have a lot of those conversations. But if you're willing to say yes to those conversations, then yeah, I say bring him back, max contract.
Yeah, I mean, again, in fairness, I don't know how much of a choice they have either, especially if they want to continue to be competitive. But
Right,
again, I think it's going to be a really fun,
right.
interesting few years for them. And to pull it back to your Batman reference, before you get a good Batman and Robin, you first must get a good commissioner to run your police department. And the Pistons went and got their new commissioner Gordon, and that's what we're going to talk about here today because this is from half court. where each and every week we come here and talk all things Detroit basketball, NBA basketball, WNBA basketball. If basketball is being played in a landfill, we'll talk about it. If you like that, be sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, but also be sure you follow my people on X. You can find Troy on X at TroySergy44. You can find myself on X at Sean Half Court. Jeff Iafredi will be joining us as well in a little bit. You can follow him on X at Jeff Iafredi. But with that, let's get right into the big news for the Detroit Pistons. It has been announced as of last week, or reported, I should say, that Trajan Langdon is reaching a deal to become the new president of basketball operations for the Detroit Pistons. He started as a scout for the San Antonio Spurs. Then he was a assistant GM with the Brooklyn Nets, and then ended up being the general manager for the New Orleans Pelicans after he actually also interviewed alongside David Griffin for that same job. But they liked Langdon so much that they offered him a massive contract to be their general manager as well. Now, Langdon, who has been one of the, kind of the uh, up and coming prospects as far as next executives, someone who's been pegged as going to get this type of job at some point, will now have the opportunity to run the Detroit Pistons. We'll have the likes of Cade Cunningham, Jaden Ivey, Jalen Duren, Asar Thompson to play with. He will also have some important decisions to make about the likes of Troy Weaver, Monty Williams, and what direction they go there. Now, Troy, just off of initial impressions, off of the things that we can see on the surface, what are your impressions of the hire? And how much time do like how, as far as judging this type of hire, how much time do you think, it necessarily takes to really get a good outlook of how someone's doing?
Right, right, right. I think we certainly have to get into the mix of the draft and see, of course, any deals or free agent signings, and then even actually probably have to wait until the season actually starts to see how that plays out. So certainly, I think you have to be, as a fan in the long game, being willing to play the long game with trying to judge this hire. But yeah, first thoughts are good. I really think kind of the best and the only way that you can look at. Having emotions about this, good or bad, is to look at the New Orleans Pelicans roster. And, before the pod, we were talking a little bit about, what that roster actually consists of. And yeah, number one, consists of veterans, right? You got like CJ McCallum, you have Jonas Valanciunas, who are proven players in the league, who can really help your team win and
Productive veterans.
contributes on both sides of the court, which is super important for a team like the Pistons. Another thing that we brought up was wings. Looking at a guy like Brandon Ingram, even looking at a guy like Trey Murphy and Herb Jones, those guys are able to play the wing well on, guess what, both sides of the court, which is something that they've struggled with that position for a while now. Is you can have a good guy like Bojan, right, but doesn't really play the other side of the court very well. So I think looking at this.
Miscast in his role.
Right, right, right. And I think he can probably, if he does the same thing like he did in New Orleans, he can assess this roster and truly, truly have those conversations of what the heck does this roster need? What does Cade Cunningham need, to be put around? And what does what could help Asar Thompson grow and contribute as a player and, maximize his potential? If we keep a Jalen Duren, what does he need as well? Likewise with the Jaden Ivey conversation. So, yeah, I feel the more I think about it, the better I feel. But I really think looking at the New Orleans Pelicans roster is the only way to really try to make a guess here in late May.
Yeah, 100%. It's a lot harder to, have that type of, conviction about an executive candidate because unlike a coach and a player who we can see up front, all of the work of an executive is done behind the scenes. So, we don't know truly the full extent to, like their capabilities. But what we do know is, Langdon's someone who's been highly regarded across the league for, a good while. He's someone that, they very much liked in New Orleans and, is not a, insignificant loss for their franchise. And I think like another, situation that you look at and you kind of like, if you take any hope or like want to look for the positives, he was an assistant general manager in particular in Brooklyn from like 2015 to 2018. And that was when they had the D'Angelo Russell, Karis LeVert, Jarrett Allen, Brooklyn Nets, where, I mean, if you remember what those Nets had as far as assets, that team took chicken and turned it into chicken salad. They didn't own their picks. They were pretty much given to Boston and spread all throughout the league. So they were able to identify talent and get pieces and essentially, again, make chicken salad out of the little things that they did have. So, for someone like Langdon who's coming into a situation like Detroit where they are in that unfortunate situation where they're losing a lot of games and don't own a lot of their picks going forward, it gives you that understanding of it's someone who's been there before, who's helped, take situations and, make them better with time, right? So, I think if there's anything that you need, as far as like a candidate that you're bringing in, it's a proven track record to be able to do something like that, right? So, I think of the candidates that were available, like, is he the most experienced? No. But he's really experienced, and I think he still is really experienced, I should say, and he still has a youth that I think fits this team as well. Now, one thing that I'm not sure if you saw Troy, but there was a lot made of the fact that when Langdon was a player, he was a client of Arn Tellem. And in my opinion, there's just this weird narrative around Arn Tellem as a whole. Like, yes, he has a say or he might have input and give, like his opinion on people, but just this thought that he's the one who's running the show is just simply not true. So I don't really know, and I'm not sure if how you feel, but I don't think having that prior relationship is something that should be a damning judgment or an impression on his ability to be an executive.
No, I mean we're hiring him, right? So I mean I don't think our talent really plays into that a lot. So I'm really not worried much as a Pistons fan. We got to remember here that this is the highest basketball league that there is, right? So I mean when you hire someone, very rarely will they be influenced by outside sources to a degree in which you are talking about, where you would be certain. Of course, people have talk to other people. Of course, there's judgments and calls, but when if it's a coach, if it's a GM, if it's a president of basketball operations, those guys are actually doing the job. You don't have to worry about conspiracy theories of who's in their ear and making all the calls. It's just I don't really play into that game. So
Yeah, I think where a lot of it comes from is, as I've kind of referenced on other places before, it comes from a Mike Valeni a segment where he was talking about, kind of like some of the connections with Arn Tellem, but also I think it just comes from the conversations of having too many cooks in the kitchen, right? Of not necessarily having that clear hierarchy of who was fully in control, like during the head coaching process. I know, there were candidates that Tellem liked. I know there were candidates that Troy Weaver liked, right? And so I think if you kind of just look at the biggest thing that this hire does as a whole is it brings clarity because ultimately Langdon's going to have the final say. It is his basketball operations that he's going to be running. So everything that will happen moving forward will go through him. And so that kind of brings into what those next steps are. And over the next couple of weeks, he's going to have a lot of really difficult decisions to make, specifically about the general manager and their head coach. I personally, I don't know, like I'm not sure what your thoughts are, Troy. I think it makes a lot of sense for both sides to try and give one more year at least to Monty Williams. Hope that the roster that he was given was, like something that, like can be improved upon now that he's had a year with some of these players and now that, you bring in someone else to run the ship, so to speak, and steer things clear. I think there's more of a path, at least to me, for him to continue with the organization than a Troy Weaver, just because of of what position was filled, where they are as far as their status in the organization, and especially with how close the general manager works with the president of basketball operations. They generally want someone in that seat that they pick themselves. This isn't reporting, this is just sheer speculation. But what are your thoughts on that regard?
Yeah, yeah. I certainly would like another chance with Amani Williams. I think there's still some untapped potential with him as a coach because of what we've seen in previous teams like obviously I'm thinking the Phoenix Suns most recently. But at the same time, Sean, when you win 17 games and then are worse the next year, and the next year is your new hire, I don't know if my or your opinion is going to matter with this.
Right.
Meaning, I'm not sure if he's back because it's so hard for the fans, even I don't know if the players, but to the organization to run it back with the current coaching. I get it. I want it to happen, but I don't know, Sean. I don't think that that's super realistic at this point. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but
Well, I think on the flip side, it's difficult because for one, it's still the beginning of the week. The Pistons, at this time still haven't officially announced, that they've struck a deal with Trajan Langdon. So as far as, like moving forward with, like the coaching search and, like things of that regard, if you're gonna make that move, that's a move that you have to make pretty quickly because teams like
right,
the Lakers have already moved on from their head coach about a few weeks ago. Teams like the Hornets already moved on and hired a new head coach. The Cleveland Cavaliers, right in your division, they're about to be going through the process of getting a new head coach. So a lot of the candidates that would, in theory, make sense for the Pistons are talking to other teams right now.
right,
So when you look at, reasons as to why he would be back for another season, to me, would you want to move on from Monty and not know what the landscape is for coaches on the market? And then do you really want to bring in someone who could just be a stopgap? Or do you want to actually find someone who can fill that chair for the long term? Right.
mhm,
And I just don't know, like, depending on how this job market goes, if that candidate would be out there. Um, I brought up on Crunch Time. I think James Borrego is someone that would make sense in Detroit. He was the old coach of the Hornets back when they used to get to the play-in tournament quite a bit. Ever since he's left, the Hornets have seemingly fallen apart. So, I think he's someone that would make a lot of sense. But again, to your point, it's hard to see him coming back after that type of season. But on the other hand, they made a very, very significant commitment to him. And I
yeah,
still think that the Pistons would be better off if that Monty contract somehow worked out for them rather than just having to swallow it,
sure.
you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's going to be a really interesting summer. But I guess I didn't really think about the fact that other coaches who or other organizations who parted way with their coaches are talking to the best candidates right now, and especially you're right, Cleveland. That was a good team to bring up because I think they're going to be pretty aggressive with their hire this summer. So
Yep, especially if they wanna keep Donovan Mitchell, especially, like, if they wanna, right the ship with Evan Mobley and a lot of the pieces that they have there. A lot of teams, especially with how few great coaches there are out there in the NBA. Like there's truly like I think the term I've heard before is just like a coach shortage. I think it's pretty fair to say that the NBA, there's like about like 5 or 6 great coaches, a ton of pretty okay coaches, and then a couple guys who just don't fit the bill, aren't quite up to snuff for that role. Um, I don't know if Monty fits under that quite, but I mean, it's certainly this last season, I mean, I think we all can agree was puzzling as far as
mhm,
that regard goes.
right.
Yeah. Another little piece of Pistons news, Simone Fontecchio actually had surgery. Speaking of Italians, we're joined by one right now, Jeff Iafredi. Jeff, it's good to see you, my man. Welcome to the podcast. We appreciate having you here. Now that you are here, what are your thoughts on the Trajan Langdon hire now that you've had some time to stew on it? And what do
Uh,
you want to see this summer from him?
so we could all agree, and I'm not sure if you guys have already mentioned this, but I think the first move, the obvious move, would be to, and I think this would be a good message to send to the fan base would be to fire Troy Weaver. I think that's the first move that needs to be done. Now, to speak on the hire, I do like the hire. I think we have to be realistic here. Tim Connolly, the Timberwolves advancing, it just kind of became unrealistic at that point, and they needed to bring in a president of basketball operations. So if Trajan Langdon, he was one of the candidates, and I love his resume. I mean, that's all we really have right now. And I know with the Pelicans, he was more in that if you compare it to like a backup quarterback, but not quite because he's actually doing stuff behind David Griffin. I like him as a player, what he knows, his experience. I mean, he's played overseas, and I think that's the biggest thing that I like about him personally is, when you have anyone in charge that is in touch with overseas basketball, and you look around the NBA and see where it's heading, and it's heading to. It's always been a global league, but you have more European superstars than we've ever had. To me, that's exciting. And we'll see as time progresses with like the whole like talent evaluation thing and in terms of making moves. But initially, off the bat, just judging a book by its cover, I like the hire. So out of all the candidates, Trajan was the one I was probably the most intrigued by, just given his history and his track record.
Yep.
So we'll see what he does. But I think the Troy Weaver, bringing in a new general manager and at least just clearing house would be the first thing I think would send a good message to this fan base immediately.
Yeah, for sure. I think he's definitely going to have a lot of uncomfortable conversations as far as that regard goes. And you bring up the one angle that we didn't quite touch on, which is the Tim Connolly route, which, although he would obviously be the kind of white whale, so to speak, the number one candidate out on the market, it also, would have kind of felt like the Pistons of the past, specifically last offseason, if they had just continued to wait out for Tim Connolly. And I mean, what if they made a massive money deal for him and that didn't work either? Right? Like that's a very realistic scenario. Now, I mean, his track record's pretty dang good, so you don't know that for sure. But nonetheless, I think the Pistons did a good job of identifying someone they like, someone who's young and they could build around and making a definitive decision because I mean that's what they needed is clarity. And so
Mhm.
someone who again, who I said before, kind of has been able to take chicken, make chicken salad. That gives some optimism for sure. But he's going to have to make a lot of hard decisions. And I think the other piece as well is, what do you do with Monty? Like, do you enter the coaching search right now because it is already well underway for several teams. You'd be getting in pretty late in that candidacy pool. What do you envision happens there, Jeff? What are your thoughts?
And this, I know this is a very sensitive topic. I know a lot of, I almost said Lions fans, well, also Lions fans, but Pistons fans.
Not a lot of easy conversations on this pod of late. We haven't been able to ask many
No,
fun questions. No.
no, and no layups, and I'm okay with that. Monty, I think that conversation, you have an argument for both ways, although it doesn't seem like it. I tend to lean on the side of I need a little more of a sample size, especially given what he had his first year coaching. And I know people bring up, well, what about the rotations? What about how he misused Asar and Jaden Ivey and that story? Like, I trust me, that I understand that. And there's people that bring up, well, he works better with an older roster. But then people seem to forget what his first year in Phoenix looked like. That's where I always go to what he took that Phoenix team. I think they went from like 19 wins to like 35 wins the following season,
Yep.
and they didn't and they didn't even have Chris Paul at that time. So I like Monty. Of course, he has his flaws. If there is a move where Trajan says, "Hey, we got to bring in a new head coach," that's fine because I respect if you're a president of basketball operations, you want your guys, and I understand that.
Mhm.
But also, I'm not. I'm on kind of the side of giving him a little more time. Like that. That's where I'm ultimately at right now. So again, if he's fired, I'm not going to throw a hissy fit about it. But I would give this man at least more time to where you can. To me, it's always been the roster construction has been the biggest issue for me. So
Yeah.
if I'm going to blame the roster construction, why am I going to blame the guy that's had to deal with the roster construction at the same time? Although you
Yep.
can, like I said, bring up rotations and bring up different things. Um, I, I I I would lean keeping Monty. And we'll see. Maybe Trajan clears house. But at this point in time, the only person that should be fired should be Troy Weaver, in my opinion. But we'll see. Could be both.
Yeah, 100%. It's gonna be it's going to be a pretty difficult conversation to have. Not only that, but he's also going to have to identify, which pieces he's going to want to build around. And, he's also, right off the bat, I would also imagine one of his first orders of business is going to be negotiating that extension with Cade Cunningham. And so, a lot of looming things for Detroit this off season. One guy who I think is I was kind of bringing up a minute ago, Simone Fontecchio. He had surgery earlier this week on his toe. The Pistons said he should be good to go by the time the season comes around. And even though he is a restricted free agent, it does seem like he wants to be in Detroit. He was really good in his time with the Pistons, and I think it makes a lot of sense, bringing guys like him back because he fits the mold of things that we need on this team. Um, Besides him, like, do you think it's going to be a very, like, do you think it is going to be a very heavy off season as far as transactions? Like, do you think it could be he could wait a little bit until the deadline? I personally think that the roster is probably going to look a lot different day one than it did at the end of this last season, because you have to start moving in that direction. But how aggressive, I guess, is more so the question. Do you guys think they'll be?
Yeah, I think pretty aggressive. I think you have to kind of do a complete 180 with this roster in a lot of ways, just to try to be more competitive. And yeah, we have some good pieces, but Fontecchio is a guy that I would, if I were to have an opinion on it, I would want to stay, just because of you're right, just how you get both sides of the floor with him. And just his ability to score too. I mean, it's just I think a wing guy, and I don't think he'll necessarily, hopefully, not be a starter, right? I think he's kind of more of that, second string kind of guy, ideally, who you would want to come in and to get you a bucket and to play some solid defense on that, side of the court. But yeah, I just think there's too many moves to do, Sean. I love that game we played a few months ago. That still is going to be so interesting to see. Who gets the closest answer to that, right? Of looking at the core four of how many of those four are going to be there. Looking at Cade, Ivy, Asar, and Duran. And I think we both said, I think all three of us said two, but I think our different two. Or I'm sorry, I think actually I said three, and Jeff, I think you were three too, but Sean,
Mhm.
you were more of the two camp. So
Mhm.
we'll have to see how that plays out.
Yeah, 100%. Jeff?
I think it's going to be an aggressive summer. And that kind of goes back to what I said earlier about leaving an imprint. And I think for Trajan Langdon to be more aggressive, to overturn this roster, at least try and make moves, like be in conversations. And I'm curious with the history. And you brought this up on our show, kind of like the Brad Holmes when he went to the Detroit Lions with LA. I'm curious if he can get a deal done for Brandon Ingram, but not even just Brandon Ingram. I'm talking about in free agency as well. I see an aggressive summer. And I also see, potentially a trade on draft night. I think that would be a great thing too, whether it's moving up
Yep.
or moving back. Because I saw that clip, I believe Anthony put out Pistons talk about his philosophy in identifying talent. If you're drafting top five and what kind of players he's looking for. Like if I'm Trajan and you're walking into the worst team in basketball, I think you have no choice but to be aggressive. I know what we're used to the last couple of years is letting this thing marinate, letting players grow. But when you bring in someone from the outside and they're coming in,
Mm,
that I think that mindset will be the complete opposite. Not saying he's
great.
going to trade away everybody, but he's going to look to improve this basketball team immediately. So
Mhm.
Yeah.
I am excited, whether that's making moves internally or maybe going outward and acquiring talent.
Yeah, 100%. I honestly think it doesn't even have to be massive moves with massive names either. If the Pistons can go out this offseason and hit a double, not even a home run, but just a solid double, get on base, so to speak, that would be something that sets them up, going forward because we talk about all the time the teams that are, that are at the end of the season, they're at the end of the road, so to speak. They're the teams that have made their own luck. They're the teams that have made the right decisions, that have built and constructed really solid rosters. And a lot of these teams didn't really depend on lottery luck outside of the Minnesota Timberwolves. I mean, we don't have to talk about that. That's fine. Nonetheless, like the Indiana Pacers, for example, they were not the ones that drafted Tyrese Halliburton, but they identified a way to go out and get him. They
Right.
weren't the ones that drafted Pascal Siakam, but they found a way to piece things together and go out and get him too, right? And then you also see even some of the later we were talking about him a little bit ago, Andrew Nemhard, a guy that, wasn't super highly regarded either, but you're able to develop him in house because you have solid veterans and pieces you can put around him, right? So, um, for Detroit, it's not. I don't even think it has to be going to get a star player this summer. If they can go get a Brandon Ingram, that would be awesome. But just hit a freaking single or double. Get on base, get some solid, get some guys that are playable. And really at that point, you can only go up from where you were over the last couple of years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
agreed.
Good
And to
stuff.
that point, I don't think it has to be necessarily significant. I know when
Mhm.
you're the worst team in basketball, record wise and talent wise, I mean, yeah, you start to think like maybe we do need a significant move, which would be great. But at least just adding shooting would make it would make my entire summer. If you add two uh, consistent 3-point spot up shooters to help Cade Cunningham, I think
Mhm.
I would be ecstatic with that. Now, is that the only moves that need to be made? No, but
No.
that's the minimum of what I'm asking for. It's just add talent, whether that's in free agency, maybe it's a Malik Monk, or maybe it's a Gary Trent Jr. Who knows? It doesn't necessarily have to be a Brandon Ingram, although that would be a great to add a proven All Star. But hey, like you said, Sean, I'm cool. Any way you can improve this roster. I mean, Trajan knows that just as much as we do.
Yep. Malik Monk's a great example of that. He's a guy who's like, super solid, especially if you were to come to Detroit, I think he wouldn't have to play the six man. I think he'd probably start right away and he'd be just a quality level starter who can get you buckets, who can be reliable on defense. I like
Mhm.
that name, Jeff.
Yeah.
Very, very, very good.
He's a guy too, Sean, that I think we could potentially. I feel like the fit could be so right with him in this role that we could be potentially seeing the best basketball we've seen from a Malik Monk. I just think I don't think he's been around. Guys like a Cade Cunningham. I mean, he has a Sabonis and things like that. But where I'm getting at it is, as a point guard, being able to get him the ball and to get him open shots and buckets. I think that could really elevate his game.
Yeah, I think with respect to De'Aaron Fox, I don't think he was looking at, oh, how can I get my teammates set up
That's
at all times?
right.
I think he's looking to chuck that mother.
Yeah, right. Versus Cade has a little bit different of a mindset in game. So
Hmm. Yeah,
Yep.
shoot first, pass second. I think Cade's like pass first. Oh, no one's open. Okay, I'm shooting.
right,
Yep.
that's
A
kind of how I was
and one more thing as well, just kinda speaking on this, we actually talked about this when I came on Crunch Time last week, Jeff, but a lot of people in the Pistons fandom, for whatever reason, there's this debate of whether or not the Pistons should start over all the way, but, like, meaning trading even Cade Cunningham and seeing what you can get in return and starting over that way. I personally just think that that's the definition of insanity, doing
Yeah,
the same thing over and over again, hoping for things to change. And, the whole point of the Pistons winning that lottery was, it had been a long time since they had the chance to draft number 1, and really been since Grant Hill since they had that type of prospect.
Hmm.
yeah,
So, I personally think that if you're moving on from a Cade Cunningham, you're hoping you find another Cade Cunningham.
right.
So
And
I
that's
don't really
not
know if that makes a lot of sense. Do you guys agree with me on that?
good. I do.
Yeah. Go ahead, Troy.
No, you just can't start from scratch because Cade Cunninghams don't grow on trees. Sure, the league is getting deeper, but that just proves that the other 29 teams are going to want, their star players to be around other solid players. So, I mean, I just no, you're not guaranteed, like not even 50% chance that you would get a player just as good, if not better than him, moving forward if you were to part ways with him. So
Mhm.
to be honest, I'm surprised you even brought that to the podcast because it's just so silly to me.
No, it is absolutely silly. I did not bring it to the podcast as a "this is my idea." I know people are gonna say it in the comments because we get it in the comments. It's a conversation people are having, but Jeff, it's just not a worthwhile conversation.
No, I think you guys both nailed it. The last thing that fans should want is this team to rely on the lottery once again. Okay, so let's look at what is real. You have a player in Cade, which he is one of the most talented. You brought it up in quite some time, at least homegrown drafted players. He's going to sign that rookie extension. The NBA incentivizes him to do so. All right, so he's going to make a lot of money, and you're going to keep him around. And let's just say hypothetically, let's just turn the top. Let's say let's make an argument. If you were making an argument to trade him, eh, you're selling a stock when it's not at its highest point anyway. Like, why would you trade Cade now? He just returned this season off missing all of last season, the prior season.
Right.
So if anything, even if you wanted to trade him, you wouldn't do it now. But even thinking about trading him to me is dumb. You haven't even seen this roster maximized yet. It's not even a roster you can look at and say, yeah, he's got enough. Like, no, and he's the best player you have. So no, absolutely not. Cade is a to me a true franchise. Whether you want to debate he's a 1 or a 2, I think we get to see Anthony Edwards in the playoffs, so everyone compares every player they have to who he is. Even if Cade isn't Anthony Edwards, he's still a very good player. I mean, he was on the Ringers. What was it? Top 25, under 25, whatever it was,
Mhm.
and he was ranked on there. Like, he is widely regarded as one of the best up and coming players. So no, absolutely not. The fact that even people would suggest that, I mean, you trade them, get what for him, number one, but number two, you got to rely on the lottery, to your point, Sean, to get another Cade, or hopefully an Anthony Edwards or Victor Wembanyama, which, by the way, you didn't even get number one when you had the worst
Yeah.
record. Like, what are we doing here?
I mean,
It's a dumb conversation.
yeah, I mean, historically, when you've drafted Luke Kennard over Donovan Mitchell, when you drafted Stanley Johnson over Devin Booker, when you've been the franchise that's done that thing over and over again, and you finally get a guy that fits the ilk of those types of names, you don't just trade him once the signs
Yeah,
of trouble,
that's a great
start
way of
showing
putting
up
it.
right away.
Right.
Plus, as a reminder, he's not even 23 yet. So, like, all this talk about how we need to, like, start anew, like, he is so young. He's still at square one, even with going into, getting that max extension. But speaking of that max, I'm not sure if you guys saw, but with the new media rights deals getting kind of solidified, and with the All NBA awards getting passed out, they have now revealed how much Luka Doncic could be getting paid with this supermax extension, and it's absolutely crazy. I'm not sure if you guys saw the numbers, but it's totaling it would be a 5-year extension totaling up to $346 million, and it would have him earning $78 million in the final year of that contract. Guys, we're getting to the point where NBA contracts per year are what they used to be for, like, an entirety of a max contract. It is insane what
Well,
money these
Sean,
guys are getting paid.
like you've said many times, and I've adopted this belief myself, is would you rather have that money going to the players or the owners? To me, it's a no-brainer. You got to pay them, and if you're a Dallas Mavericks team, you're not going to let him go, right? I mean, you got to pay him that cash. So you're right. It is quote unquote ridiculous in that regard, but at the same time, okay, so Cade Cunningham's don't grow on trees. Luka Doncic definitely does not grow on trees. So, Jeff, what do you think, bud?
He's worth every penny.
I bet they wish they could pay him more, if
Yeah,
anything.
right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah. He is no, it is crazy. I mean, you look around just the NFL and the NBA. I mean, you're gonna see $100 million player per year, by the way,
Yep.
eventually. So, like, that's good for the players, good for Luka. He is that caliber of player. Like, we've gotten to see it now since he's been in the league. It's wild that there really hasn't even been, like, there's been a lot of growth, but he peaked immediately, and he's still not peaked, but he was immediately great, and he's only getting better. So for
Yep.
Luka, like, yeah, he is the true definition of not only a franchise player, but a face of the league potentially player. And he should, in my opinion, he had every. I think he had just as much of a chance to win MVP as Jokic did this year. Even though the records weren't quite the same, his impact is incredible. Given
Yep.
just now that he has Kyrie Irving, seeing what they're doing now, but this is a guy who took a Mavs roster to the Western Conference Finals without Kyrie Irving. He did win, but he still got him there. He's incredible. He's probably my favorite player to watch, and Kyrie, who's been historically my other favorite player to watch. I tune into Mavs games and I'm spoiled, so it's
Yeah.
awesome.
The level of basketball that they are playing right now is just nuts. I
Oh,
mean, people, like, about a couple of weeks ago, even this podcast, for all intents and purposes, we are hyper focused on that Nuggets Timberwolves series because it was such a high level of basketball. It felt like it was, for all intents and purposes, the finals. But then the Mavericks were like, "Hey, hold up, y'all forgot about Luka Doncic. Y'all forgot about Kyrie Irving, and we are just watching Luka just blossom in real time into the guy that we all knew he was." And it's just, this is what happens when a guy of that ilk has the right pieces around him, right?
Mhm.
Like the PJ Washington deal was such a win in a way that I never thought was possible. But
Yeah.
also Derek Lively and Daniel Gafford
Daniel
being as
Gafford,
awesome as they
big
both are
man.
is
Yeah.
absolutely huge. But just, I mean, when you talk about a guy just truly arriving as a super duper star, it feels like that's what we're watching Luka do in real time. And I mean, until proven otherwise, I think he is the face of the league if he keeps this up.
Yeah, I bet Kuz. What do you think Kuzma thinks? The Mavs weren't a true contender when he was. There was a deal agreed for him to go to Dallas, and now he's sitting there watching PJ thrive with them.
If he's not losing sleep over that, he's lying. He
Yeah.
is absolutely lying because I don't know how you look at their success and go, "Oh man, I screwed up badly. I really screwed
Oh
up."
my gosh, I applaud the Mavericks for being such a great organization, and that's because of what Mark Cuban has done, but also their ability to take risks just in
Yep.
general. I mean, they trade for Kyrie Irving, who's such a
Yeah.
wild card within its own right, and it's
Right.
worked out for them. They get PJ Washington, they draft Derek Lively. He's been really good this playoffs. And then you
Yep.
bring in Nico, who's was a Nike executive, but now he's the GM and he's doing really well. Like Jason Kidd, we've already known to be a really good coach, at least now, and now lately he's been a really good coach for them. So, and he's been great for Luca too. So I think the Mavericks just as a whole, with just the last 2 years, they're these like the domino effect to where they are now. It's been impressive, man. Mavs are. I'm so glad they got Luca. That is such a perfect spot for him, and I hope
Match
he
made in
never leaves.
heaven.
I hope he never leaves, and I hope they
Yep.
never piss him off to the point where he leaves.
And last season, I mean, with them not even making the play-in tournament, we were pretty convinced that that gamble was not going to pay off with trying to get a Kyrie Irving, just with the head case he
Mhm.
was last season, with how he ended things with Brooklyn, but then comes over here. But Sean, you and I were texting last week. I mean, we haven't seen this Kyrie Irving since Boston, and now
Yep.
we get to see potentially. The Mavs still have to close it out, but potentially Kyrie Irving going to Boston to try to beat them to win a championship. I mean, Sean, I could not have made this script up. None of us, no NBA fan was thinking of this script until it happened, and boy, are we here for it.
Whoever wrote the script for the NBA this year absolutely cooked. Just absolute shout outs to them. Just masterclass. Like I think the script writers at the NFL are even like, "Oh, that's good. We didn't even think of that." You know what I mean? But no, in all seriousness, I remember the pod just like yesterday when that trade happened. And I remember the big thing we said on that podcast is it looks awesome on paper, but
Yeah,
basketball's not played on paper. And a lot of it was it's a great fit, but it's a great pairing, but the roster they had around them at the time was just not even close to capable of taking them over the top. If you remember, they were small. Maxi Kleba was their starting center. Like they weren't athletic. They couldn't defend. It was just a terrible fit. But now you have guys who can space the floor. You have guys like Derek Jones Jr., who's playing as well as he's been as well as he's been for you. You have guys like PJ Washington, but even like Jaden Hardy's playing really good basketball. Like just from top to down, they're getting contributions. And the other thing you brought up, all the credit to Jason Kidd because he's coaching his ass off right now. Just absolute coaching masterclass. And
Mhm.
I didn't think Jason Kidd was that good. I'll say it. I knew he was a great player, great mind. His resume as a coach was not great for a minute there. So it feels like he's truly evolved as a coach as well. So just all the credit to everyone over there. It's been fun, but on the flip side, in these last 3 games, Karl Anthony Towns is 3 of 22 from 3.
Can't
0 of 8
win.
from 3.
Can't win with those numbers.
What do you mean? He's taking 1,500 shots a day. So understand that he's consistently working on his game.
Best big man 3-point shooter of
1,500
all
makes.
time.
1,500
Best
makes.
big man
Excuse me, not
3-point
shots.
shooter of all time.
Not shots, makes.
Did you see how Shaq was like, "That's cap." No one's shooting like no one's shooting 1,500 shots a day this time of year.
Yeah, you probably could have knocked that down, and I would have believed it. 1,500. I think that's a little could be true, but holy hell, that's
Yeah.
too many shots. Great for him, but no way in May you're taking 1,500 shots, and clearly it hasn't translated.
I think in Steve Kerr's prime with the Bulls, he said he only shot like 250 a day, and that was not in May. So I don't know what that was in the off season. That was in the off season.
times that
And that
by
was
7.
not in May.
Yeah, times that by 7.
I just Troy just says certain things a way that I couldn't. Just it's so well said. But in all seriousness, the other pieces as well, like I think some of the slander on Rudy Gobert is a little bit too extreme. But having said that, you would think for a 4-time defensive player of the year that at a certain point he would have a moment where he would look like it. Like specifically, I'm not saying that he's not a great because he is a great defensive player. You earn that 4-time defensive player of the year award for a reason, right? But having said that, just about every big moment where, this postseason where they've needed Rudy Gobert to make that big stop or to be, that defensive player, it just hasn't been there. I mean, you had Rudy. I mean, you had in particular the moment that sticks out is when Luka strips Rudy on the defensive side of the ball, and they're standing right in front of the Timberwolves bench, and he's essentially looking at him like, "Really? You have this guy in?" And it's like you almost even have teammates they were making jokes about how lethal that fadeaway shot from Rudy Gobert was. Like at a certain point, as good as he is, like when you have guys who just continually have these types of performances or lack thereof at this level, at a certain point, it's just who they are, is it not?
Yeah. The only thing I don't like, the only thing I don't like is when and I don't think Pistons fans or people in Michigan do this, but I've seen like the comparison to someone like a Ben Wallace who has won multiple
Oh
defensive.
yeah, we do not compare this man to Ben. No,
No,
no, no, no,
but
no, 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 no.
the thing I always point to is Ben Wall. You're not putting Ben on an island if you're Luca and going, yeah, we love this matchup. Yeah, we want this matchup. Ideally to take the last shot. We're gonna do it on Ben Wallace. Like no one's ever said that in their right mind. So there is that to Rudy, but to your point, like, does it take away from his impact? No. Personally, I know he's a rookie, but Victor Wembanyama to me, man, like that dude to lead the league with almost 4 blocks a game is ridiculous. Like
He's
I would,
going to win defensive player of the year next year. Like, just place that bet now. Just place that bet right now.
Yeah, do it now. But yeah, it's people are gonna poke fun at him. I mean, he's obviously a liability on the perimeter, but like as a interior defender, you like, dude, Rudy Gobert is probably one of the toughest, guys to get a shot off on.
Mhm.
I mean, whether or not there are flaws in his game, his defensive game, I don't think they're big enough to be like, oh, he didn't deserve that defensive player of the year award.
I agree. I
You know,
think the Kendrick Perkins stuff on First Take was out of pocket and kind of a little bit of an overcorrection. I'm not sure if you guys saw, but he essentially said he was embarrassed for voting for Rudy Gobert for Defensive Player of the Year and that he's tarnishing the award with his performance and that no one respects him. And it's like, that feels a little harsh. You know what I mean? Like, again, he's a
There's
4-time Defensive Player of the Year for a reason. Having said that, it does feel particularly damning that this team not only looks better when Naz Reid's on the court instead of him, but also you can point at their best defensive performance this entire playoffs against Jokic even was the game that Rudy Gobert missed because of the birth of his child. Like, is that not a little concerning?
Right, but what do you do if you're the Timberwolves to try to fix it? You know,
And they only have one solution, which I've been bringing up for 2 years. They only have one choice. You know what their choice is?
trade Cat.
Trade Cat. Karl Anthony Towns, you're a Washington Wizard.
And the crowd goes wild.
Yep. Kyle Kuzma, you're a Minnesota Timberwolf.
Um,
That would actually be pretty fun, though. I'm not going to lie. But in all seriousness, I just
better. But
Mhm.
yeah, and again, the Rudy thing, it's like I'll say this too. Like Victor, even though I think he was the only one closest to Rudy with winning that Defensive Player of the Year, I don't think even Victor could keep. Luka's still getting the shot off. Like it doesn't matter who it is. Like let's be realistic here. Right? So again, if you want to bring up the meme of Jane McDaniels looking over and being like, "Oh shit," because he knew Jane is their best perimeter defender. Like he's not. I think he was just more like pissed off that he couldn't be the one guarding Luka on the last shot. Like that's probably where that was. But it's funny as hell.
Yeah.
But hey, still four-time Defensive Player of the Year winner. No matter how you look at it.
Yeah, I also think he recognizes because, like, it's Minnesota's a pretty heavy switching team. I think in that moment he realized pretty clearly that was the switch they wanted.
Oh yeah.
Specifically, like that was what they drew up the play for, was to put Rudy in that position. And I don't necessarily know if he needed to switch because again, I think, he probably could have stayed in front of him, but I mean, at the same time, that is just also one of the best clutch shots I've seen in the playoffs in the last 10 plus years. I mean, my jaw dropped before it even left his hands. It felt like it was going in.
And
That's just
probably hit that. He's hit that so many times in the regular season too. Like he just makes it look so easy.
Yep. 100%. Speaking of making things look easy, the Boston Celtics might have had the easiest run to the NBA finals in the history of the NBA playoffs. If you look at the uh fortune they had on their end, as far as Donovan Mitchell and Tyrese Halliburton both missed their final 2 games. Jimmy Butler missed the entirety of the series round 1, so they haven't really had to face much adversity heading into the finals.
But they sure will next round.
They sure will next round. And I think what makes this matchup so interesting, like this pending matchup between Boston and Dallas, it's not just the Kyrie Irving, Boston storyline, which obviously is going to be compelling. I think, there's even the people who compare Larry Bird to Luka Doncic to Larry Bird. I think that's going to be brought up a lot in this series as well. But to me, when you look specifically at the matchup, it's the best fourth quarter team in the league versus one of the worst in the Boston Celtics, a team that, plays with their food, gets in tricky situations. This year hasn't really had a lot of times where they've had to dig themselves out of holes. When they have, they're not very good at it against arguably 2 of the best closers in the history of basketball.
Mm-hmm.
Like how do you like Boston in that matchup? How do you pick them in that matchup? Because for me, like when it's 5 minutes to go, I trust everyone on Dallas's side way more than I trust people on Boston's side. Even with the talent up and down the roster, it is deep. I just think, when if it's close with 5 minutes to go, who do I trust more? I trust Luka. Are you kidding me?
Mm-hmm.
It's gonna be a good series. That's a great point, Sean. I look at Boston's roster though, and I just see a better all around roster with how Tatum and Brown, specifically Jaylen Brown, played the last series. I look at a vet like an Al Horford. I just can't bet against Boston, even though you're right. Everything you said, you looked at that game 2 against Miami. You look at that game 2 against Cleveland. You look at that game 1 against Indiana that they barely, they were so lucky to get that game into overtime to then, kind of cook the Pacers with, how tired they were. But I don't know. You have some great valid points, Sean, but I still think Boston's roster is just too good.
Yeah. I guess my counter to that would be, and Jeff, I would love your input too. I'm trying to look back at this entire playoff run. I can't think of the Boston Celtics performance where it was like, oh, that was dominant. I mean, yes, you brought up the individual performances, like Jaylen Brown this last round was really good. Jason Tatum always has his moments of brilliance, and you can tell he's been there before in that sense. But to me, when I think back of every Celtics game I've watched this playoffs, it's how they've almost managed to screw up almost every single game, and how they were essentially just playing with their food and looked puzzled with the final minutes.
Yeah, and this has to be the year for Boston. And I'll get into who I have winning, but because I'm obviously picking Dallas. I already picked Dallas against the Timberwolves, but this has to be the year for the Boston Celtics. You can't make as many conference finals as they've made, and not walk away with a championship. I don't know. I was watching a podcast and they were talking about it. And I think of all the teams that have made, like, I think the Celtics made like seven, maybe Eastern Conference Finals, something like that number. I think every team that has had that same accomplishment has walked away with at least one NBA championship. So
Yep.
if the Celtics don't get it done this year, they'll be the only team with that stretch, that amount of time making conference finals, making finals, and not walking away with something. So there's a lot of pressure, I think, specifically on Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, because Jaylen Brown, given the contract he was given, and also what he's been saying lately, how he doesn't feel like he gets enough credit. Well, here you go. You'll have the opportunity. And Jason Tatum, because I think for a while here, and it's still kind of the storyline. It's like Jason Tatum, no one doubts how good he is. What people question is he a number one in terms of skill, but number two in terms of mindset? Like, is he a true number one guy? And that's something that I think just always looms with Tatum. But luckily for him, as a roster, to Troy's point, Derek White, I think, is going to be one of those X factors this series. And I also think Drew Holiday is going to be one of those X factors. And I think Porzingis is getting healthier. So that'll be a good thing for them.
Well,
I'm still going to go with the Mavericks. I'm going to pick the Mavericks to win in the finals. Like you said, Sean, I trust Kyrie and I trust Luka. I picked them to go to the Western Conference Finals. I thought Denver would be there. And then I had Denver winning. But of course, now that it's the Timberwolves, I'm changing. I picked the Mavericks to make the finals. So I'm going to go with the Mavericks still. I think Luka gets his first NBA championship.
yeah, I mean, with Kristaps Porzingis, that really is the question, right? Is he going to be healthy? Is he going to be available? Because, if he is, that Boston team's a whole different threat, and I think it makes it a better matchup against Daniel Gafford and Derek Lively. But if they don't have them, if they don't have Porzingis, then that is a very significant piece of the Boston puzzle that made them so dangerous, right? So I don't think it's going to be a sweep by any means. I don't think I don't think there's a definitive, like favorite as far as one team is clearly going to win over the other. But if you are looking at, players that you trust in that war of attrition, if it is the nail biter type series that we all think it can be, I think you look at the fourth quarter moments, but I also think this is especially when you start to notice the gaps of head coaches. And we've talked for quite a while about, is Joe Mazzulla the right coach for the Boston Celtics? This will without a doubt be the defining Joe Mazzulla series. Because if they lose this, in what world does he come back as the coach next year? Especially if they lose bad.
Right.
Go ahead,
So
Troy.
No, you're right, Sean. I just think that's an interesting point with Missoula. I guess I didn't really think about that because in Boston you have different expectations than the rest of the league, right? It really is
they're going for
champion.
number 18.
Right. A championship or bust. And with a roster, we can admit that Boston has the better roster all around. However, like you guys said, it's about playing the game, not just who wins on paper. So with you going into this finals as the favorite in Vegas and on paper, with as far as just roster, right? As far as who's on your team, and you don't come up on top. That's a great point, Sean. I didn't really think about the coaching consequences if this thing doesn't, go Boston's way.
I'm curious too about playing in the Garden. It seems like obviously Kyrie's familiar, but also Luka and Kyrie just don't care where they play. Like they're always going to play and
Yeah,
play really well.
that's what makes
So
that team special. Yeah,
it make it, but I think the biggest question is the guys around them, which I think Derek Jones Jr. and PJ are gonna can match up well with Tatum and Jalen Brown. And I do think guys like Lively and Gafford, they're always going to be X factors. Hardaway Jr. But I just like the Mavs, even though the Mavs don't have as much talent. I just think in terms of an actual playing basketball as a team, they just look so dialed in, so well connected. Like the
Yeah.
way they played this series, I know every series is different, but the way they've beaten the Timberwolves, I think it shocked everybody. At least we all thought this would be a series. I mean, they are
Mhm.
just whooping their ass. So, and they won both games in Minnesota. Like that makes, if I'm Boston, like yeah, you in we talked about their opponents they've had to face to get to the finals. Dallas has had test after test. They beat the Thunder. They went the distance with them, and now they're gonna most
The
likely
Clippers
sweep
round 1?
Clippers round one, which they got better as the year went on, and then now you
Mhm.
have the Timberwolves, who they're probably gonna sweep, but still the Timberwolves, who just took down the defending champions. Like Dallas is they're battle tested, which I think could be a concern for the Celtics. Big test for
Yeah.
them.
Yeah, without a doubt. I think Kyrie's experience in these situations is something that could play a big difference. And I think, the other thing too of why I'm leaning Dallas, I think, it's a big thing of it comes down to momentum, right? Of who's getting hot, who's playing their best basketball at the right time. And I think it's without a doubt the Dallas Mavericks are playing the best hoops they've played all season. Again, Boston's more than good enough to go out and win this. And they have, the right pieces. In my opinion, I don't think you could put a better roster around Jason Tatum and Jalen Brown to win a title. I only hope that we get a healthy Porzingis so that there aren't those excuses. There aren't those what ifs, and we can get that clarity of, are these guys the right pairing? Are these guys a championship pairing? I still think they are, but at a certain point you got to prove it.
that's right.
Mhm.
That's right.
And
So,
I like the Mavericks bench too better. The Celtics don't really have depth. I mean, especially without Porzingis, now the L's in the starting lineup, like you those guys that are coming off the bench for the Mavericks, they're good players. Like
mhm,
they could start on some bad teams. So I think the Celtics they have at least a 5-man lineup with a healthy Porzingis, probably the best 5-man lineup you look at in terms of talent. But once it comes down to it in the finals and you need guys to make plays, like I trust the guys at least on the bench for the Mavericks, and not that the bench players will be playing a significant amount of minutes, but man, as a roster, although they don't have the starting 5 on paper, like guys that are coming off their bench, like Derek Lively and Hardaway, and guys that are contributing, like man, they're going to be a problem for the Celtics. I think this series goes to. I don't know about 7, but I can see the Mavs in 6. I'll go
yep.
6. I'll take the Mavs in 6 in the NBA
They're
Finals.
both teams that are really comfy on the road too. Like you brought up how Dallas is really good on the road. Boston over the last few years has been better on the road themselves too.
Yep.
So, home court advantage might not mean a whole lot in this series. I think if anything, I think Luka is going to be excited going into the Garden with them booing him and giving him a hard time. Like he's the type of player where that riles him up. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's going to be exciting. But guys, I mean, we're just in for an exciting summer of hoops as a whole. I mean, we have the NBA finals coming up. We have the draft in a few weeks. We have the Olympics for men and women. We have WNBA hoops to talk about now, which have been awesome. I'm not sure if you guys have been watching it all, but like Cam Brink might be one of my favorite players of all time now.
I'm
Like
watching her
she's
play in
sick.
about hour and 15 minutes.
Yep, it's just we're just great time to be a hoops fan, and we're
Mhm.
gonna be talking all about it right here. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you like this video, be sure you like it down below. Comment as well any thoughts you have about the Pistons or any playoff series we talked about. But also be sure you go check out Crunch Time with Jeff Iafrady, Booner, and the boys on youtube.com/crunch time. But that is gonna do it. Thank you so much for tuning in. We will catch you guys next time from Half Court. Be sure you're subscribed.